Lorcana lovers, my name's Lizard, and today I want to talk to you about the most commonly used jargon in the trading card universe, as it applies to one of our favorites, Disney's Lorcana. The rules of Lorcana restrict players to only having 4 copies of the same card in their deck. Hence, having a playset means you have 4 copies of a card. Playsets are an integral part of deck building because consistency is key and will often lead to more victories. Ramp describes a playstyle which allows the player to quickly build up a lot of ink into the inkwell. Ink being the main resource needed to play any of your cards. Having a lot of ink in your inkwell is a huge advantage because the more ink in your inkwell, the more you'll be able to accomplish during your turn. Let's look at some examples. One Jump Ahead is a 2-cost uninkable card that says put the top card of your deck into your inkwell face down and exerted. Typically, you're only allowed to place 1 card from your hand into the inkwell per turn. So a card like this is effectively allowing you to put 2 into the ink that turn. Mickey Mouse Detective and Fishbone Quill also offer ways to get additional ink into your inkwell during your turn. So playing with a ramp deck means you'll spend your early game loading up your inkwell, or ramping. Once you've made it to the late game, you'll now easily be able to flood the board with characters and items, or play multiple actions and songs, which will lead you to a decisive victory. Aggro is short for aggressive. With an aggro deck, your goal is to win games fast. In order to do that, you will need to play a lot of lower cost characters to quickly gain lore. Lilo Making a Wish is a 1-cost character who quests for 2, and then Pinocchio Star Attraction is a 2-cost character who quests for 3. Keep in mind that low-cost, high-questing characters are going to be rather easy for your opponent to get rid of, so we also want to play cards like Simba, Protective Cub. He has a bodyguard ability. When he comes into play, you can exert this character, which means if your opponent wants to challenge one of your Pinocchios or Lilos, they have to first get through Simba. Simba is also a low-cost character, so you can easily get him out early on in the game. And this is great because it will allow our high-questing characters to stay in play longer and gain us more lore. The Emerald ink color also offers us some good examples of aggro cards. The Enchantress is a low-cost character who quests for 2, and so is Flynn Rider, who is actually one of my favorites because he puts your opponent in a really uncomfortable position. Look at his ability. When this character is challenged, the challenging player chooses and discards a card. So now your opponent has to decide whether or not they want to continue to let him quest for 2, or if they're going to get rid of him, sacrificing their own card. Next we have Control. This one's rather intuitive. The main goal of a control deck is to, you guessed it, control the board state and manipulate the outcome of the game. Playing with a control deck often means that you're signing up for a long-winded game. Control decks usually aren't interested in pressuring the opponent in the early or mid-game. Instead, you'll be taking your sweet time, playing cards that offer additional ways to draw cards and filter through your deck, and utilizing cards like Be Prepared, which allows you to continuously eliminate your opponent's threats until you've reached a point in the game where you have enough card advantage to quest your way to victory. Control decks often use cards like Maleficent Monstrous Dragon or Lady Tremaine because these offer 2 great advantages. 1, when they come into play, they are going to eliminate an opposing threat, and 2, once they are in play, they can now quest. Grab Your Sword and Let the Storm Rage On are also some good examples of cards that you'll find in control decks. Let the Storm Rage On is especially useful because you're not only doing damage to an opponent's character, but you're also gaining a card from it. In other words, control decks seek to have great tempo in the late game. I suppose now would be a good time to describe what tempo means. In all card games, most cards require a certain cost in order to be played. Like I mentioned earlier, for Lorcana, that cost is ink. So far, we have cards that range from 1 ink cost to, I believe, 9 ink. Being that you're only able to place 1 card into your inkwell per turn, unless of course you're ramping, you will only be able to play 1 ink cost characters on your first turn, a 2 ink cost character on your second turn, 3 ink cost on your third turn, and so on, creating a natural kind of curve or progression. Tempo refers to the deck's ability to succeed in playing characters in accordance with that curve. For example, good early game tempo would mean you're able to have 2 or 3 cards on the board by your 3rd turn. Characters like Mufasa, Stitch Rockstar, and Doc are especially helpful when trying to maintain good tempo, because they allow for you to consistently place more characters onto the board. Stitch Rockstar is an interesting example because his ability allows you to draw a card for every low-cost character you play, which in turn grants you more and more opportunities to gain board presence. While eagerly awaiting the release of Set 2, I would frequently listen to other YouTubers talk about upcoming cards as they were intermittently being revealed to us. I remember hearing them refer to certain cards as vanilla, and had absolutely no clue what these people were talking about. None of these cards they were discussing looked anything like vanilla. Clearly, I was missing something here. Apparently, vanilla is a term used to describe a card that has no additional text or abilities. Oftentimes, these cards are big bodies with average or unremarkable stats. In fact, more often than not, vanilla cards do not see much play. I would honestly love to have a good reason to include some of these vanilla cards in my deck, however, they just don't offer enough utility to earn a spot in a competitive deck. Every time I hear someone say mill, I can't help but to imagine a big old-style windmill. Truthfully, I think that's the point. Mill refers to cards which enable you to draw more cards and cycle through your deck. Usually, drawing more cards is a good thing. However, when used properly, a card like A Whole New World, which forces you and your opponent to discard your hand and then draw 7 new cards, can be devastating. To your opponent, that is. Imagine a situation where this Yzma card and A Whole New World are the only cards in your hand. Now say your opponent continued to outpace you with the number of cards in their hand. You can play Yzma, send one of your opponent's characters back into their deck, and force them to draw 2 cards. Now that you've increased the number of cards in their hand, you can go ahead and make them discard all of them with A Whole New World. Hence, mill can both be beneficial and wildly disruptive. Okay, let's entertain another scenario. You're currently at the late point in the game, and although you have lots of ink in the inkwell, you currently have no cards in your hand. At the start of each turn, you draw a card from the top of your deck. In this moment, you're completely at the mercy of the card gods because you have no way of guaranteeing the next card being useful. So if you reach a point like this in the game where you have no cards in your hand and you have to continuously rely on the top of your deck being useful to you, we consider that top decking. And I'll tell you right now, there's no better feeling than top decking the perfect card that in turn wins you the game. Finally, I want to talk about a word that is used constantly in the trading card game universe, and that is meta. Simply put, meta or the meta is whatever play styles or strategies are currently most popular. So saying a card is crucial to the meta means that card is being used in decks that are competing at the highest level. Here are a couple examples of meta decks right now in Lorcana. First is my favorite deck to play with. This deck is commonly referred to as Steel Songs, for obvious reasons. Finally, we have Ruby Amethyst Control. This deck is hands down the best deck. You will see this deck along with other variants of it consistently sitting in the top 8 of all the biggest tournaments to date. Well folks, that's all I have for today, but if you enjoy getting consistent injections of all things Lorcana right onto your YouTube feed, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Thank you very much, and as always, have a great day and be kind.
Yeah, he's a lizard.